Welcome to Art Moves Podcast, Episode 2, where I've had the pleasure of talking with bio artist Lauri Lynnxe Murphy and photographer, filmmaker, and producer Jonna McKone, who was PlatteForum's most recent resident artist. Her exhibition is currently on view at PlatteForum through June 4th. You can make a reservation on our website to see the show in person or check it out online in a virtual format. Jonna recently produced a documentary called All Light Everywhere, which takes a far-ranging look at the biases and how we see things, focusing on the use of police body cameras. The film will debut in theaters this summer, so keep an eye out for that.
And what I do is when people ask what I do, I'll be like, okay, it's kind of weird. Are you sure you want to know? Because I work with bugs and people don't like bugs. So it's like I've gotten the reaction before when I've just flat out told people, ew, you do what? You know, like you play with snails, you work with bees, aren't you scared? It's like they focus on the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. But then when I sort of prep them, mm-hmm. It makes them really curious to want to know more. And at the same time, they kind of are, it's like a trigger warning. You know, it's like they know they're going to hear something unusual, you know, and they're I don't anymore ever hear like, how is that art or anything like that I used to hear, you know.
Interesting. Do you think it's because of the way that you're phrasing it and the way that
you're
talking about it?
I think giving people a warning is good because they don't expect what I'm about to say anyway. And if I just launch into like, yeah, I'm an artist, I make art with insects, they're like, okay, you're weird, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And I might be too. I don't know. I wouldn't be, but like, you know, I get it a little. Like I didn't always love insects, so
yeah.
I still only love certain ones. I'm very bigoted when it comes to insects.
You haven't always made work with insects, have you?
No.
How long have you been making work with?
I started this work in 2010 in grad school, and I was making work about the environment and about, you know, at the time my work was focused on like genetic modification and disease and how that shows up in the landscape and in our bodies and things like that. And I was interested in extinction. I think I'm far more focused on extinction now. But in 2010, when I was in grad school, I was really fortunate to have Ann Hamilton as one of my advisors. And she came into my studio and she's like, and she just tosses off these little simple things. And, you know, you just don't feel like crap until a MacArthur Genius winner tells you you're doing the wrong thing. It's like she's so simple and plain spoken. And then you'll spend 3 weeks trying to interpret this simple thing she said. But she just came in my studio and was like, you know, I don't understand why you're making approximations of nature when you could just work with nature. And one of my big goals in grad school was like, I got to get away from these horrible toxic materials. And about the same time she said that, I had met an undergrad who was a master beekeeper with the Ohio State Bee Extension, and named Dan Jarvis, who I haven't spoken to in years because he's in the upper peninsula of Michigan now. Still keeping bees, shockingly, up there. I don't know how you do it. But and I was like, well, you just teach me. I want to try to work with bees. I was not aware at the time of like people like Agatha Dyke or Hilary Burseth. I didn't know about any other artists working with bees. I just was sort of following the muse, and then he taught me, and it was 2 years of just failing. 2 years of just failing to make anything that I wanted. And I'd take things out, and people were like, oh, that's really cool. And I'm like, no, bees are cool. That's got nothing to do with me. They're just doing what they do. I wanted to have like a blend, because you have to find your own voice if other people are doing a thing. But I wanted to find a blend between like my work and their work and the fact that you wouldn't be able to see the difference. Mm-hmm. You know, I think I'm there now. But it's just still trial and error every year. You know, every new hive of bees, it's just, I don't control bees. Yeah. You know, they do what they do, and I have to figure out how to manipulate it.
So what do you do? Can you talk about what you do with the bees?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. I make sculptures with them by using wax foundation, which is what beekeepers use to make those nice frames, you know. And I make sculptures with that, and I introduce it to the bees, and then they work on it, and then I take it out, and sometimes I work on it more and give it back. Sometimes they take the wax and put it other places. Sometimes they ignore it completely. Some materials they don't like, and every hive of bees is going to react differently. So it's just always, I can go an entire summer and not get anything. like that I want or that's good. But I'm able now to introduce color, which I keep top secret because I just feel like it wrecks the mystery if I tell people. And also like
putting pigment in the wax when you say introduce color.
yeah, basically, yeah. But I can blend it, like knowing how they're going to use it. So it's a little almost more like painting in that way. And then I can manipulate how they're going to shape the cells to some degree, like that they, the foundation's imprinted with a pattern of the honeycomb, and they build perfectly anyway. That's what they do. But if I distort things, I can get some distortion in there. Like I said, I want to show like the impact of humans on nature. I want to show like what my interventions cause. I don't want to just have like a bees are cool moment, know. So yeah, it's pretty fun. I also work with snails. I'm really obsessed with bark beetles right now, and trees. Very obsessed with trees right now. So.
What about bark beetles? One of my friends is actually the friend who came with the baby to the art opening, Emma. She's been talking about developing this film treatment where one of the characters is an anthropologist who studies bark beetles.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've been fascinated with the trails that they leave since I was a kid. And we used to have these split rail fences that had, trails. And I used to do rubbings of them and stuff. So I started working with snails when I became allergic to bees. So I stopped with the bees for a few years, but I'm back again. Because my ex-husband actually, ironically enough, wanted to learn to beekeep, and so he helps me. And then he got stung yesterday, so sorry. But he's not going to die, at least, I got to carry an EpiPen now because I really pushed it way too far. Wow. I was not taking the doctor seriously at all, as we do. But the snails came about because I was at a residency on a farm in upstate New York. It was a biodynamic farm, so we had to pick things off. And so I had this trail pattern. I figured out it took me a long time, but like I saw the just ephemerality of the trail. Like I'm out there in the field and I'm picking these snails off, and I put one on a sketchbook that I had with me and saw like how it was iridescent. It's like gasoline in the sun, the oil's in it. And so I wanted to preserve that. So I tried everything I could think of. And then I finally realized I could just cut it out. And then that came with a beautiful metaphor because the movement of my hand is erasing it while I'm trying to preserve it. So how much of a metaphor is that for like just everything that we're doing right now, that we try to be benevolent and then we screw it up? So that led to noticing that the bark beetle trails and the snail trails were similar. And very fortunate that my boyfriend, his family has a cabin in the mountains that we go up to, and so there's a lot of dead wood up there. And so I started sort of picking through, and I wanted to do like I always think of this like preserving or reparative idea when I approach these things. And so I started thinking about kintsugi, which is the Japanese art of like repairing pots with gold. And I started sort of getting gold wax and putting it in the trails. And it didn't show up against the wood. And so I started different colors. And so that kind of developed into that. And now what I'm doing is, which seems insane even to me, is there's a 60-foot long downed ponderosa pine on the property. And we have to clear wood anyway because there's too many fires. We need defensible space. And so this tree is hollow, and I realized, like, this is the biggest tree. This is the mother tree in the forest. And then that book came out about the mother tree. I've been calling this project the mother tree. So I got to connect with that woman because that just came out a couple weeks ago. Interesting. And anyway, I just kind of had a love affair with this tree for the past 7 years. I just sort of a crush on this tree, and I really wanted it. But I thought, I'm going to take it out entirety, and I'm going to like move it. And so it turned into this crazy, like, I don't know if you've ever seen like Werner Herzog's Fitzcarraldo, where he's trying to take a boat over a mountain, and then he made the film about the making of.
Yes.
Right.
It's incredible.
So I started thinking about it in those terms, like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'm like looking up, how do I rent a mule? Okay, there's no mules. How do I rent a llama? Like it's, and then I'm like getting my friends involved, like, come help me with this. We're going to make a film. And I realized, like, the last time I was up there, I had this huge epiphany because I realized it's like, this is not happening. It's not coming out in one piece. It's too fragile. There's no space to move it through the trees without damaging the trees. And then I looked at it and it's falling apart, and I started to realize I can take this apart bit by bit. So now what I'm proposing for the member show at Red Line, and then I have a show next year at the Arvada Center, so I'm trying to make it it's 60 feet tall, so that atrium at the
wow.
entryway is about that, I'm guessing. So now I'm just going to take it out bit by bit and catalog it really carefully so I can put it back together, but explode it out on a framework so that you see the interior. So
like open it.
Yeah.
And are you doing anything with the snails regarding the tree, or is it just about the tree?
They all relate to each other based on insect extinction and the insect apocalypse we're facing, which, if people don't realize, it's like 60% of the insects. There was a journal PLOS article that came out in 2019 that scientists are estimating 60% of the insect life is gone. That's 2/3 of the life on the planet. It's really frightening. We don't even know we haven't even cataloged all of the insects. We don't even know.
Yeah.
So it's all related via that, but it's not. I mean, the tree was absolutely killed by insects, but now I'm sort of interested in this idea that like the trees and the beetles are engaged in this sort of act where it's like it's symbiotic, and at the same time it's going to result in their extinction. You know, and so yeah, and it's funny because I'll like present these pieces of wood, and people have no idea how much work goes into preparing the wood. It just looks like the tree when I'm done. I mean, that's my goal, but it's like, you know, but it's because it's a ponderosa pine. It's probably around 700 years old. I'm guessing. I haven't done any calculations. I got to measure. Yeah, but the problem is, you know, as our forests burn here, it's a very Colorado specific or California specific problem. But as our forests burn here, the ponderosa pines are not coming back because the climate has changed to the point that it's not conducive to them. So they may be lost as a species eventually. So yeah, I'm just always drawn to what we're losing, you know, and trying to like preserve it in some way. I don't know. I've talked too long. I want to hear about your work.
It's interesting, that idea of like preserving. I mean, just like this idea, I think so. I don't know. I feel like I'm just very drawn to memory and sort of like encapsulating or holding on to fleeting things. And you know, I love trying to challenge myself to kind of hold on to that intangible. But it also is kind of inherently problematic. I mean, just like the whole concept of like preservation and the kind of history of that movement. And it's just, yeah, it's interesting to think about, like, you trying to get this tree somewhere, like, is damaging the surroundings in the process. There's this violent act of like chopping it up to get it to the place, but it is also important, that process, you know, however you end up coming to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be prying it apart bit by bit, carving it apart bit by bit, very carefully to preserve, like, ponderosa pines have a swirl, have a spiral twist, and it feels wrong on some level in what you're saying. It's like it's I feel like I have to be very reverent and careful and almost religious about it. Like it just feels like a violation of a body, and yet it's sort of like embalming a person, like you're trying to preserve something that you cannot preserve.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And if I leave it there, it decays and goes away. And if I take it, I destroy it too. So like either way, it's just like us not going to be here one day, you know?
Yeah.
How does memory show up in your work? Like, what does it wind up, what do you wind up doing to preserve things?
To preserve, I think it's kind of like either when I'm using a camera or doing some sort of like alternative photo process or working in film. I think it's really about process, like using archives, like having a sense of like what words or ideas or images of the past are like haunting the thing that I'm interested in. And then also, I think I do a lot of just like oral histories and kind of spending time with people. And even I think there's like a bodily memory of like returning to sites and getting a sense of like the light and the weather and, you know, my footsteps in that. So yeah, there's like these valences of memory. There's like the long arc of memory and like what you have access to as an artist, as a researcher, and thinking about the problems of those memories, whose memories have been preserved and documented and captured, and why are those voices privileged, then the people there, and then myself. So I think all those things kind of interest me in terms of process and kind of like trying to explode out of the frame a bit and have all of those things, try to, I guess not contain them, but like kind of contend with them, like ask those questions. But you were making me think about a friend of mine. I don't know actually like if this is all going to work out, but she does these like wood sculptures and wants to do a show in this neighborhood in Baltimore that's next to this really big old graveyard. And it's right in the city, and so it's not, the graveyard's green, but like the neighborhood itself, there's not a lot of like trees and stuff like that. And we were talking about my project could be like a tree library where I use a large format camera and take pictures of trees and maybe like ask families about their memory. I mean, I think there's an idea of like, you know, social justice, like what neighborhoods are kind of green and historically how that came to be. But I was thinking a lot of Henry Fox Talbot, like one of the earliest photographers, before right before the invention of daguerreotypes, he was making calotypes, which are like a really simple, basically like a photosensitive paper. He was putting in a camera, and so he'd make like one of his most iconic images is this ghostly tree, you know, a negative that he made. And so I thought about maybe like kind of researching him and his process a little more, which never ended up, his calotypes didn't take off. You know, simultaneously other people were, you know, doing, making other inventions that were just much more easily reproducible. But I just like his image of his tree, and then thinking about maybe like a catalog of a tree in a neighborhood, and then maybe this withering ghost of a tree, like these diptychs that pair. I've been thinking a little bit about something like that, or I don't know. I'm just thinking about these neighborhood trees, just like a really simple, how do families on their block care about their tree without making it too heavy? Like,
well, I mean, what strikes me in that is that in that neighborhood, the dead are provided with nature and the living are denied it.
Oh, whoa.
You know, it's like that is really striking to me. And then also too, the idea that like there probably were trees in that neighborhood that aren't there anymore. So I wonder like what historical photography would yield in terms of sort of like, I don't know. I'm thinking about this because I have this sense living in Denver with everything changing so much all the time. That, do you get this too, where it's like you have ghost buildings where you're like, I remember a building there. I remember what it was. I remember what it looked like.
So often.
And then I'm so disturbed also on the other side when I see a spot where it's been torn down and I can't remember what was there. Then I'm like, I'm just disturbed by that, especially if it's like recent. You know, like you see something's been torn down, you're like, whoa, what was there? What was there? What was there? And you got to try to remember. But it's like, I feel like the older people in that neighborhood probably have more memories of trees than the younger people, because I think that I just noticed that, I don't know, I noticed that like in myself that like part of those memories are like about this attachment to certain things that don't exist, whereas people who are younger haven't had as much time to form those attachments. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
When I was, sorry to interrupt, when I was a little girl, I grew up in Texas, and we were at some family friend's house on some ranch or something, and they were growing pumpkins in this field. But then my uncle or whoever I was with was like, I want to show you something. It's really special, and you have to like be really like respectful. And we walked through this field, and he was with, I think, another, like a friend of his or something. And it was me, and I was just a little kid. I didn't know what was going on. And we got to this tree, and that's what they wanted to show me. It was this really old tree, and there was some kind of like marker or inscription on it. I don't remember what it was. But they said the man who lived on the land was really reverent towards this one tree because he said it was really, really old, and it was there when the Native Americans were like occupying that space. Yeah. And it had something to do with their culture, and maybe there was an inscription on it. I have no idea. But I just remember how he loved the tree so much, and he went out there to like spend time with it. And as a little kid, I was just, you know, like taking that in and like processing it. But it's really special to hear you guys talking about, you know, these stories, and then I totally forgot about that memory until you
that's cool.
started talking about.
I mean, I have that experience.
Trees.
I have that same kind of experience. Not exactly the same, but the same kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
like, well, one thing is the tree that I'm going to take out, my boyfriend, Bob, took me to that the first time we ever went up there, and was like, check out how cool this tree is. And so he takes pictures of old trees all the time. And it's just something we share in common. And so ever since then, I've thought of that as kind of like our tree in a way. It's weird. But the other thing is, I spent every summer and most weekends in Wyoming on a 32,000 acre working cattle ranch that was also a dude ranch. And my dad was the farrier. So like we went up there, and then it was a membership driven deal. And so we eventually became members. And then eventually the wealthier people raised all the dues to the point that anybody who was poor had to go. So I lost this place. And I think about it all the time. And I've even thought about like writing the people who were there and going, can I just please come visit? Can I please make a residency for myself there or something? And I want to do that someday, because that place was just I knew every acre of that land. And I mean, it was the 70s. And so it wasn't like now with helicopter parents. So like, it's amazing I'm not dead, because like nobody paid any attention to what I was doing ever. So like I'd get up in the morning and I'd pack a lunch and I'd get on a horse and I would go out and explore this whole land. And so I knew every part of it. And I had specific trees that I would go and visit that I was sort of attached to. And I can't tell you why those trees, but like they were important to me. And then there was also like many, many places where Native Americans had lived upon the land. And my mom's hobby was searching for arrowheads. And she would just walk around for hours bent over looking at the ground. She has thousands of them. It was such a magical, special place. And I feel really fortunate to have had that as my child, as really the best part of my childhood, I would say, because, I mean, it really, I don't feel like I was like the other kids in that time, because I would go back to school and have this whole different experience than they were having. And so I was really weird and an outsider, like many artists, but yeah. And then my mom grew up in New York, so we were out there a lot too. And so I had that contrast of like the suburbs versus rural areas versus the city. And in the city, like this still happens to me all the time. If I'm out there, well, I haven't been out there in so long because pandemic and job and all that. But I used to go out quite a bit, and I'd be walking around with friends and they'd be like, oh God, I just envy you so much being able to get out to nature. And I'm like, you're in nature. There's grass, there's birds. You're like, how, like, I don't see the separation. It's there. We're nature. We're all part of that. And it's not like city versus nature. That's weird to me. I don't know. Like I really love, like, I love the tenacity of plants that grow up through sidewalks.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's part of our like cultural problem with how we look at nature, that it's a place to like go to that's out there.
Yeah.
And definitely, I mean, I think when we went with the art lab interns and they really enjoyed, I think, being at Rocky Flats, and a lot of them hadn't been out there, or, maybe just going out to like the mountains isn't as accessible, and I don't know, just the idea that like people of a certain class might be like, I'm not going there because it's not beautiful enough. Like, it's like, what are you looking for? Like, what is achieving this idea of nature that's worth your time? And I don't know, I think it's like interesting to explore that in a city like Denver, because it just seems like so much of the reason it's changed is because of like skiers and climbers and this like recreation culture that is just so steeped to me in colonialism, and like a way of looking at the land of like, I'm going to conquer this mountain and burn fossil fuels to get up so I can ski down, and my skis are made of plastic and they cost $1,000. Like, I don't know, it's just very there's something that I really hope gets resolved there. Or even thinking about the history of national parks, national forests, like they are a public good, but the ways that they were created is really problematic. And even like the way the roads cut through, built for cars.
There's so much there.
So much there. The way the vistas are constructed, there's a certain gaze that it is kind of coming out of, like what beauty is, that really is a white Western gaze. I don't know. I think all that stuff's really It's really interesting to me.
You really see it show up here culturally in terms of the mountains versus the plains. That like Colorado's like bisected almost in half.
Yeah.
And people love the mountains and ignore the plains. And every time I go out, and I love the plains. Every time I go out to the plains, people are like, "Why? Why would you go there?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, it's so beautiful. But yeah, what you're saying about sort of the history of it and everything, it sort of presents this view that the mountains are for some people and not for others. And class is a huge part of the structure of mountain towns and places like Aspen, where it's like very wealthy, but like the people who live there and work there can't live in the town. They have to burn fossil fuels to get to the town to serve the people that live there or don't even live there. They're part of the time. It's a strange culture here for that. I mean, I don't really know. Like, I go to the mountains all the time and I feel very fortunate, but I go to the mountains all the time because I'm old Colorado, right? Like, I'm fourth generation. I grew up here. My boyfriend's family has owned that land for many years, and I'm fortunate. Like, I can do that, but so many people can't. And there isn't a place for people to go. And I mean, I really admire my friend Patricia Cameron, who runs something called Black Packers, where she is like trying to get people, specifically Black people, but it's open to everybody, out into nature who haven't had those experiences. And she is just a dynamo, man. She's amazing. And it just kind of gives me chills to think of like people experiencing that for the first time. And then so many people too, I think, are afraid of it. And I remember I had a studio mate at one time who had come from New Jersey and just moved here. And she was really funny because she's like, "Oh, you and your nature, And I mean, I was born in New Jersey, so I'm not throwing shade. But, like she was terrified. She would not go. She didn't even want to go to the park. I think that's like a death of part of your soul to not be in nature. Like, it's so important. We are part of nature. We're not separate from it. And I think when we separate from it, it replicates that white supremacy and colonialism, that we think we have supremacy over the land, that we're going to control it by turning it into a lawn, and we're going to, you know what I mean? That's really such a huge thing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Yeah. And I definitely do not gravitate towards art that tries to solve anything, or try to do that myself. But I think it's like, it's such a fun challenge to think about, like, humans making art with tools, and that to me, like, what makes people is art. If we didn't have art, what would we be? We'd be animal. I don't know, whatever. Like, yeah. art makes us, I think, culturally humans, like the ability to make new languages and ties and connections, but like to work in that way and then be so concerned with the non-human, and where those two kind of like come together, I think is a really, it's really beautiful. And then to think about like creating spaces for people to come to work with, space to think and consider and not be reactionary. Like, it's having, like, with the PlatteForum show, it became a really big thing, these portraits I made having the right spacing, because I felt like if they were too squished together, people can't have space to inquire and find that moment where like their body intersects with the thing they see on the wall, and their life history or whatever you want to call it. Sorry, there wasn't really much of a point there, but
no, it's super timely. It's actually super timely because we've all been separate and now we're coming together, and we're like, how close do we get? Are we allowed to hug? I did that when I came in. Are we 6 feet apart? Are we, Laura Ann Samuelson, who's one of the residents at Redline, did a performance last night, and they come from dance, but they are doing what I think of as a sculptural practice, and it was all very laborious work, heavy things being moved. They made a bag out of wood that's like tied together that, I can't adequately describe it, but I was watching the man that was sitting in front of me who wanted to get up and help. Like, he's leaning forward. It was almost excruciating to not help someone and to see that struggle. And then every once in a while Laura Ann would go, okay, okay after a really difficult thing, and it was like reassuring the audience, and it was pretty incredible. But I just spent so much time watching that man, like watching his reaction and feeling it in my own body, because lots of us introverts were fine with being alone. But what I wasn't fine was sharing my space with so many people on Zoom as a teacher. I was spending like 8 hours a day on Zoom, and that felt like I wasn't alone ever. And that started, it was ironic because I was alone and other people were reporting feeling lonely. And I was like, I just want to be more alone, because I feel like when I turn off the Zoom camera, people are still with me in the space, which is a weird psychological flip. But I think a lot of us are pondering these questions right now, because like all of us were affected by this experience, but in such different ways, even though at the beginning we were saying, oh, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And I curated a show actually at the beginning of this online, and it's kind of cool because it was like a show I could never curate in real life because it was international artists that I couldn't afford to bring here. And my colleague Joshua Field set up a gallery called Distance Gallery, and so, but the show was called like All in This Together because you kept hearing that phrase, but it was very clear we were not. And so I focused on like the natural world and how like the virus also has an instinct to survive, embedded within it. And so that really that like we are all in this together with nature, but we don't think we are. We think we're safe from it. I think it was a big wake up call to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. That's been interesting to me, because I think if we had a more healthy society, like people might think about the permeability of their bodies, how soft, how tender we are, how fragile, how much we rely on each other to survive. And I think it's really become like political. You were just talking about conspiracy theories before you started talking here. Just not there. That conversation is always missing. Like those existential questions. What does it mean to live in a healthy society on a healthy planet? Or maybe healthy is not the right word, but that really didn't happen at all. It was like technology. Yeah. What screen do you have? Like
people seem like they don't want to access their vulnerability and admit that they could die, and being presented with this thing that they had to be afraid of. Seeing so many different reactions. Some people just paranoid to just extremes, and some people not afraid at all. And then if you were afraid, you were called a snowflake, I mean, it was very strange. It could have been this moment, I think, with different leadership where we would have all been in the same space together a little more. But I don't know. I just find it's a really, really weird time to grapple with these things, because the idea of any sort of intellectual life is looked down upon, and then we think in binaries. People can't dream a better society because they can't dream themselves out of a binary. They think that everything that exists has always existed, and there's only you see it in the arguments about politics where it's like, oh, well, we can have capitalism or socialism. And it's like, or we can realize that both of these systems are very young and we can think up something new if we want. Like, these have only been around for a few hundred years. It's not like capitalism has always existed. It's not like socialism has always existed. These are ideas that don't even exist in their pure form anywhere. But we get caught up in this binary language of everything. Just everything is this or that, this or that. It's never like, how do you dream outside of a binary? Like, how do you dream of anything? Oh my God, it drives me so crazy.
It's something I've been thinking about a lot too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's and what Jonna said too, just about asking those important questions that lead to like living a healthier existence as a community or, a nation or a planet, and maybe it is happening, but maybe it's happening slowly, and maybe this virus has really shown us how we really are all connected, and hopefully, like these kinds of conversations I find really important and really timely, and really just to get us thinking like outside of the way that we've always thought, So I just really appreciate both of you guys coming in here and sharing.
I think it really boils down to your worldview. If you view humans as benevolent or malevolent, if you think that all people are good or all people are bad, you're going to behave a certain way.
I don't think that's a thing, though. I don't think people are good or bad.
I don't either, but I think there's people who do think that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, like if people are taken care of, they're good, right? Like if they're not taken care of, then they have that survival mode kick in where they'll do anything they've got to do to feed their family or to get whatever it is that they need to feel taken care of, even if it's a temporary fix. And that's unfortunately like it causes a lot of problems.
I mean, science proves that, even with drug addiction, like that our environment makes such a difference and what we have access to makes a difference, and meeting Maslow's hierarchy is paramount. But you still have, over the top of everything, this sort of, I mean, it comes from religion, this belief in like good and evil, like that somebody is all one or all the other. And you see it played out constantly on both the left and the right as far as who is acceptable and who is not, whose speech is acceptable and whose is not. And it feels to me like what we're grappling with on some level is ourselves, is like the feelings of the dark side versus the light side within ourselves. And I hate even using that language. I don't have better language. It's terrible language. It's white supremacist language. But it's like this idea that like there's good or bad and that everybody is all one thing. It's nonsensical. It's absolutely nonsensical. And the same goes for like nature, that we've decided some weeds are bad, some species are bad. And I mean, one thing I'm obsessed with right now is tamarisk trees, and they're incredibly invasive. They suck all the salt in the soil up to the surface, and that kills everything else. They take all the water. But they were planted by the settlers that came here.
Interesting.
So it's like we're trying now to eradicate them with beetles, because each tree has its own beetle. So they brought in tamarisk beetles. I can't help but think that when we do these things, it's going to go wrong. Or fireflies. Did you know there's fireflies in Colorado?
No.
Okay. Lived here my whole life. Did not know there were fireflies. Chased fireflies on the East Coast when I was a kid.
A recent thing?
It is an amazing story that I've been, like, so much of my work is research driven. So I just wind up on these just insane rabbit holes, So like when I was finishing grad school, I started working with fireflies and trying to make a patch that I could point a camera at a field of fireflies and have them make music, right? Have that translate into like a live webcast of music. And I failed at that in part because I suck at programming, and in part because I came back to Colorado and stopped working on it and thought there's no fireflies here, Having grown up here, I'd never seen a firefly. And I started to hear these rumors that there were fireflies here. And so at a certain point, I was like, I just need to investigate this. And it turns out, like, the worst part is my brother knew all along that there were, which I'm like, why would you not tell me? You knew what I was working on. What is wrong with you? But I started researching, and I came across a grad student at CSU that was standing in front of a field of fireflies. And I'm going to do him a disservice because I don't remember his last name. His first name's Tristan. He's no longer a grad student. He was studying fireflies at CSU, and his work's still being peer reviewed for that research. And now he's at the University of Texas, Austin, studying ants. And obviously an entomologist. So I contacted him, and he was excited to talk to me. It was great. We had the greatest Zoom talk ever. He showed me where to find the fireflies, but the story of why they're here is amazing. They've always been here. There was a researcher in Kansas who had thought that they came across with the settlers, and Tristan had found some historical documents that indicated that the settlers were seeing the fireflies, so they didn't come with them, and that he got a genomic sequence of the fireflies. There's actually 2 species in Colorado that are unique to Colorado that don't exist anywhere else. And they're actually in competition with each other. And so the Front Range fireflies learned to mimic the patterns of the other fireflies so that the females would then attract the other fireflies and eat them. And then they learned. So there's this whole competition going on. But the reason there's more of them now, which is crazy, is when the railroads were coming west, they needed gravel. And so every town that had a tributary at the end started these gravel pits where they mined the gravel that came down from the Rockies. And we started experiencing a lot of flooding as a result. And so in the 80s, there were these conservation efforts that said, look at all these ugly gravel pits. Let's turn them into marshes. Let's flood them. And that's why they came back. That's why we're seeing them more now. They were always there. They have a very short breeding cycles, and that's when they flash, so we don't see them. But mid-June to mid-July, they're even in the middle of Boulder. There's some I've heard. There's like Boulder, Fort Collins, all along the Front Range. There's fireflies. Valley View Hot Springs, which is on the Orient Land Trust.
I've seen them there, actually.
Have you?
That's the only place I've seen fireflies.
I'm going up there.
Colorado.
I can't wait.
And people just don't see them because their breeding season's so short. So it's just like this very small period of time.
Yeah, they don't. But they also don't see them because they're not in public areas. Like they're disappearing on the East Coast because of light pollution, which is how I got interested in them in the first place. I am working on that Firefly music project again with, I'm collaborating with Ben Coleman at Redline. And I'm hoping I don't know if we'll get to the point that we're doing it this summer because there's still a lot of research and work that has to be done. Yeah. But I'm excited to get to tell a hopeful story. Like for once, like I would get to tell people, no, these are here and coming back. And every single Coloradan that's grown up here that I've talked to about this is like, what? No, how do you know? I've never seen fireflies. What are you talking? Everybody's shocked. And I'm shocked. And I'm like, that's one case where human intervention both did bad and good, right? And we brought it back. But that wasn't the intention when they did that. Everything is unintended consequences always.
Yeah.
So.
Such an interesting story. Wow.
I think so too. I'm completely fascinated. I can't wait. I mean, just in a few weeks, actually, because I guess mid-June to mid-July is when you can really see them. So I'm going to start taking firefly field trips, talk to everybody into Redline and going. I'm just like, we're going to go see fireflies. I'm going to go find them first. I don't want to disappoint people.
Are you going to try to video or document them?
Yeah.
Or just,
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, because we need video to work on the project too.
Yeah.
To work on the electronic side of the project. But I'm very excited about just the possibility of them existing here because they're so magical and so amazing. Yeah. And I was so distressed that they were disappearing on the East Coast,
Yeah.
Do you know why they're luminescent? Like what the purpose is?
The whole purpose of their bioluminescence is to attract mates.
Okay.
That's it. Just to attract mates.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't have very many bioluminescent species in the middle of the country. They're more like an ocean phenomenon.
Yeah, in the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Italy, I remember these really cool glowworms that there was like this Etruscan wall when I studied there for a month, and it was really amazing when I was in undergrad. I was so broke. I was so poor, and I was able to go based on student loans. I had no money when I was there, so all I did is walk around and look at nature, which was perfect, And
eat like bread and have a tomato in your backpack.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
But it tastes so good because you're in Europe. It's okay.
No, it tastes better because it is better.
Yeah.
Honestly.
It is, yeah, totally.
It just is. It's not factory farmed, you know? But yeah, there was this old Etruscan wall, and I'd be walking home at night and there'd be all these glowworms on it.
Wow.
I really love bioluminescence.
Yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful image.
I know. Too bad so much of it is at the bottom of the ocean. We can't see it.
Yeah.
I want more of it in everyday life,
I did recently read an article about one of those deep sea ocean fishes with like the
anglerfish.
Angler, yes, yeah. It was an angler that got washed up on shore somewhere, and it was like the most unusual thing. They had never seen that happen. So some scientist is like researching,
why
how that could possibly,
because they live very deep.
There's all kinds of crazy things going on with the planet right now.
Oh, I know.
It's just, I feel like I can't keep up,
I really can't either. And I mean, I do a lot of research and keep notes and stuff, and I can't keep up at all. And then you never hear more about it. Like there was a period a few years ago where there were just birds falling out of the sky en masse. Why? Never heard more about it. Never tried to find out more about it. And the insect thing kind of makes clear that it might be starvation, but you hear about these things and it's a blip and then people forget about it. And I think we're not psychologically equipped to deal with it, know?
That level of loss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that term, Anthropocene, is really interesting because I wonder if it's a term that's, was created so that we can sort of start to psychologically process that reality,
When I hear that term, I think of how each era has a beginning and an end. And that's what it makes me think of. And I'm always just like, how can we get people to care about what they're losing if it's not them? Like that we see that all the time. Like people don't care about a political issue until it affects them. Mm-hmm. I don't think we are psychologically prepared to grapple with the idea of our non-existence. you know? That's the hardest thing. I don't even think I am. And I spend a lot of time in that headspace. You know, when Greta Thunberg started speaking, I was like, that is how I felt since I was her age. And I'm old now, you know? So it's like, since I was her age, I was freaking out about this stuff. And I was freaking out about nuclear energy, which became a big part of my thesis. I was freaking out about what we're losing, you know? And very little was out in the world then about that, you know? I'm not really sure where I was even finding out about that at that age. I was definitely aware of it. And I think too, like our attitudes, we were talking earlier about the national parks. I didn't have the greatest dad, I will say, but like the one thing he really taught me was this very reverent attitude towards nature. And we would go camping a lot and we go out into nature and he would be like, look, you're visiting. This is not your place. You be quiet. You're not allowed to run around and yell. You're not allowed to leave litter. You pack it in, you pack it out. And that ethos does not seem to exist very many places. And so when I was in Ohio and I was trying to find the natural spaces, I would go to the Hocking Hills and I was shocked because it's such a beautiful place. And everybody's running around and there's trash everywhere and there's people yelling and you cannot be free of people there. And that was a new experience for me in a way. Like in Colorado is becoming like that, where it's very hard to find spaces where you're free of people.
After this conversation, I decided to title this episode after the word biophilia. Bio meaning life, philia meaning love of, which translates into love of life. I felt like it was an appropriate word to ponder after speaking with Jonna and Lauri, who both display efforts to revere, research, and care for life in all its many forms within their art practice. Lastly, I leave you with this excerpt taken from the Biophilia Foundation website. The practice of biophilia is the active love of life and connection with and caring for each other and the living systems of which we are a part and upon which we depend. Through biophilia, that which we love guides us to protect those with no voice or vote, plants, animals, and future generations with whom we share a common destiny. Our love of life takes many forms, yet the central impulse to connect and care for life, living systems, and our natural world provides a direction to guide our actions. In a world hungry for good news and positive examples of human endeavor, orienting our actions to be guided by our love of life and nature is a profound contribution. Thank you so much to Lauri and Jonna for taking the time to speak with me and for the incredible work that you both are doing. PlatteForum is forever grateful for the generous support of so many individuals and organizations who have sustained our work since 2002. It's through these contributions, great and small, that we are able to achieve our vision of nurturing social change, promoting emerging artists, and offering dynamic programs to the wider community in Denver. If you would like to support PlatteForum today, visit our website to make a donation. Thank you.